What would you do if you had an issue with someone in the morning, got your revenge on them, and later discovered that the same person is your interviewer? This is the situation Stella Collins found herself in. She had a conflict with Sung Minute at a coffee shop and, in an act of revenge, smeared lipstick on his car window. He caught her in the act and demanded she pay for the damages. She left her contact details and went for her interview, only to get the shock of her life when she realized that her interviewer was none other than Sung Minute. If you want to see how this story unfolds, grab a popcorn and relax because it's about to get interesting, and don't forget to hit the subscription button. Drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from and like. I love seeing how far this story travel. The thing about Stella Collins was that she functioned best under exactly two conditions: a full night's sleep and zero human interaction before 10 in the morning. And on the most important day of her professional life, she had achieved neither. She pushed through the glass door of Brew and Bliss Coffee at 8:47, 13 minutes behind schedule, with one earring in, her blazer buttoned one hole off, and the quiet, desperate energy of a woman who had already rehearsed her interview answers in the shower, on the bus, and once, regrettably, out loud on the pavement while a schoolboy on a bicycle stared at her like she had escaped from somewhere. "Okay," she breathed, joining the queue and pressing a hand to her chest like she was personally keeping her heartbeat on schedule. "Liquid courage, 15 minutes, out the door, we're doing this." The cafe smelled like roasted beans and expensive ambition, the kind of place that charged $7 for something they called an artisanal oat latte, as though oats had ever done anything artisanal in their lives, and Stella loved it with her whole over-caffeinated soul. She was rehearsing her 5-year plan, dedicated, detail-oriented, a genuine team player, absolutely not someone who once cried in a supply closet over a broken stapler, when the line shifted, and a man materialized at her left shoulder with the quiet, territorial confidence of someone who had never once in his life been told no. He was tall, annoyingly so, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than Stella's rent, probably her rent plus utilities, possibly her rent plus utilities plus the emotional damage of living below a man who did Zumba at midnight, and on his wrist sat a watch so gold and so aggressively shiny that it caught the cafe light and threw it directly into her eye like a personal attack. He stepped in front of her. Just like that. No acknowledgement, no side-eye, no performative, sorry shuffle. He simply drifted into the space ahead of her with the serene certainty of a man who had never considered that cues applied to him. Stella blinked. She looked at the spot where she had been standing, she looked at the back of his very well-groomed head, and she did the mature, professional, emotionally regulated thing, which was to clear her throat with the energy of a woman filing a formal complaint with the universe. He did not move. "Excuse me," Stella said, her voice sweet in the way sugar hides poison. "There is a line, and last time I checked, cutting it was still considered rude, even for walking bank accounts." He glanced at her, briefly, as though assessing whether she qualified as a real inconvenience, and then looked back at the barista. "I am in a hurry," he said, his tone smooth, his arrogance smoother. "I'm sure she can wait." Stella blinked once, then twice, her left eye twitching like it had just signed up for war without consulting her first. "Oh, I can wait," she replied, folding her arms, her smile sharpening into something dangerous. "I can also talk, loudly, in public, about men who think basic manners are optional." A pause followed, heavy and electric, the kind that made nearby customers pretend not to listen while absorbing every word. He finally looked at her again, fully this time, his gaze cool, assessing, and mildly amused in a way that made her want to commit a small, non-felony crime. "You are being dramatic," he said. "And you are being insufferable," she shot back instantly, not missing a beat. The barista, caught between chaos and capitalism, wisely decided to prepare both orders at once, her hands moving faster than her desire to stay employed. "Here," the man said, picking up his drink first, then stepping aside with the grace of someone who believed he had just done something generous. Stella reached for her cup at the exact same moment, their hands colliding, the lid popping loose, and in a split second of tragic inevitability, her coffee cascaded down the front of her blouse like a betrayal she would never forgive. She froze. The cafe froze. Even the air seemed to pause, just to witness the moment. Stella looked down slowly, then back up at him, her expression blank in the most dangerous way possible. He glanced at the stain, then at her, then did something so bold, so outrageous, it nearly made her choke on her own disbelief. "You should be more careful," he said. Stella inhaled. Deeply. Sharply. Like a woman trying not to catch a case before 10 a.m. "You just spilled coffee on me," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "You reached at the wrong time," he replied, sipping his drink like he had not just insulted her existence. That was it. That was the moment something inside Stella snapped, not loudly, not violently, but beautifully, like a glass breaking in slow motion. She smiled. "Oh, I see," she said softly, her tone suddenly light, almost cheerful. "You are one of those people." "And you are one of those women," he replied, equally smooth, equally irritating. He looked at her then, fully this time, those dark eyes settling on her face with something that might have been consideration if it wasn't so clearly the expression of a man deciding whether she was worth the energy, and he said, very calmly, very smoothly, very insufferably, "You'll dry." And he walked away. He walked away. Stella stood at the counter of Brew and Bliss coffee with a stained blazer. A flat white she no longer had the peace of mind to enjoy. She tilted her head, studying him as if deciding whether he was worth the energy, and then, with a grace that shocked even herself, she turned and walked out of the cafe without another word. The bell above the door chimed as she exited, her dignity intact, her blouse ruined, and her soul quietly plotting revenge. Outside, the morning sun greeted her like it had not just witnessed injustice, and there, parked directly in front of the cafe, was his car. It was black, it was sleek, it had tinted windows so dark, and the body of it was so perfectly polished that Stella could see her own reflection in the door, stained blazer, lopsided earring, the expression of a woman who had been personally wronged by the morning, staring back at her with a kind of helpless clarity. Stella stopped. She stared. She felt something rise in her chest, something petty, something powerful, something that whispered, "Do it." She checked the time, her interview looming closer, her responsibilities calling her back to sanity. "I am a professional," she murmured to herself. Her hand closed around her lipstick. Chilly red number 7. Bold. Long-lasting. Transfer-resistant. Appropriate, she thought, for all occasions. She stood beside the car and uncapped it with the serenity of a woman performing a perfectly ordinary task, because that was precisely what she was doing. She was fixing her makeup, she was touching up her lip color before a very important interview, she was a professional attending to her appearance in a public space, and if her hand happened to drift toward the window with the natural, graceful arc of a woman checking her reflection in a surface that was conveniently at eye level, well, that was simply the geometry of the situation. The lipstick touched the glass. Stella drew a slow, deliberate, deeply satisfying line. Then she added a small flourish, because if you were going to do something you should do it properly, and within 45 seconds, the window of his insufferable car bore the unmistakable impression of a kiss so bold and deliberate it could have been signed. She leaned back, admiring her work, her chest rising with pride, her lips curving into a satisfied smile. "Perfect," she whispered. She was proud, she was petty, she was free, she felt satisfied and was prepared to take it with her to the grave, and she recapped her lipstick with a soft, satisfied click. Then the window rolled down. Stella blinked. Slowly. Very slowly. The man from inside the cafe sat there, one arm resting casually on the door, his expression unreadable, his eyes locked onto hers with quiet, terrifying amusement. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he glanced at the lipstick mark, then back at her. "Are you done?" he asked calmly. "Or is there more damage you would like to add?" Stella straightened, her dignity rising from the ashes like a phoenix that refused to acknowledge embarrassment. She put the lipstick in her bag. "I was fixing my makeup," she said, and her voice came out with a confidence that should have been nominated for something because it had no business being that composed given current circumstances. "On my window," he said. "The light was good," she said. Something moved across his face, something that might have been disbelief, and he stepped out of the car, all 6-something feet of tailored charcoal and cold fury, and Stella Collins, who stood 5'5" in heels she was currently wearing, did not step back because she was a woman of principle and also because her legs had made an independent decision to stay exactly where they were. "The light," he repeated, as though tasting the words for how much they offended him, "was good." "Wonderful light," she said. "Very flattering. Highly recommend." A small crowd had begun to form, because there is something about two people standing next to a car with a lipstick kiss on the window at 9 in the morning that the human brain is simply unable to scroll past, and two women outside the cafe had stopped pretending to look at their phones, and the barista who had been wiping tables near the window had also stopped pretending to wipe tables. "Do you understand," he said, in a voice of devastating calm, "what it costs to clean this?" "I imagine soap," she said, "and water, and possibly a cloth, but I'm not a detailer, so." His jaw tightened, and Stella would have found it satisfying if she wasn't also acutely, physically aware that she had 22 minutes before her interview and that the situation she had created was not simplifying. You are paying for that, he said. Stella laughed. Actually laughed. Out loud. In this economy, she said, placing a hand on her chest in mock shock. Sir, I cannot even pay for emotional stability. His lips twitched, just barely, before settling back into that infuriating composure. I'm calling the police, he said, and he said it the way people say things they absolutely mean, flatly and without theatre, and Stella's stomach dropped approximately 4 floors. And tell them what, she replied quickly, that a woman with ambition and excellent taste in lipstick hurt your feelings. Damaged property, he corrected. Artistic enhancement, she countered. They stood there, locked in a battle of words, the crowd quietly entertained, the morning officially ruined for both of them. Your name, he said, and your number. I beg your pardon, she said, because even in a crisis, Stella Collins had standards. For the damage claim, he said, or I call the police and we settle it that way. Your choice, take your time. Stella looked at him, she looked at the kiss on his window, she looked at the small audience that had gathered with the quiet dedication of people who had found the best free entertainment of their Wednesday, and she did the calculation quickly. She reached into her bag and produced a receipt from the pocket at the back, a grocery receipt, somewhat crumpled, printed on the back of which she wrote her name and her number with the same chilly red number 7 that had started this entire situation, because she had no pen and she was not going to ask him for one, and she held it out. My number, she said. I will pay you in installments, small ones, very small ones, over a long period of time, extremely long, like generational. Something happened to his mouth then, a flicker, barely a movement, there and gone like a muscle memory of a smile that his face had mostly forgotten, and he took the receipt from her fingers without a word. Pleasure, she said, and she turned, and she walked, and she did not look back, she did not look back, she did not look back, and she heard one of the women by the cafe say quietly to the other, Oh, I like her. And Stella Collins straightened her stained blazer and walked into the rest of her morning like a woman who had absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about. The interview suite on the 14th floor of Choi & Associates was everything Stella had imagined it would be. Clean lines, floor-to-ceiling glass, the hushed and carpeted gravity of a place that took itself enormously seriously, and she walked in with 7 minutes to spare, which meant she had enough time to visit the bathroom, rebutton her blazer correctly, dab at the coffee stain with a wet paper towel until it looked intentional, replace her missing earring with a pen cap she had lodged convincingly behind her ear, and assemble herself back into the version of Stella Collins who was capable, composed, and a genuine team player. She sat in the waiting area with her hands folded in her lap and her spine very straight and her interview answers queued up in her mind like songs on a playlist, and when the receptionist said her name, she rose, she smoothed her blazer, and she walked towards the door of the boardroom with the full, complete, unassailable confidence of a woman who had survived worse mornings than this one. You've got this, she whispered to herself. The door opened. She stood. She turned. And there he was. Seated. Calm. Watching her. The same man. The same infuriating, sharply dressed, dangerously composed man, with the faintest trace of red lipstick still visible on his sleeve. Stella froze, her soul leaving her body briefly to go scream somewhere private. No, she whispered under her breath. Yes, he replied, his voice smooth, his lips curving into a slow, triumphant smile. She turned to leave. Immediately. Gracefully. Strategically. Miss Collins, he said, stopping her in her tracks. She closed her eyes for a second, then turned back, her smile forced, her dignity hanging by a thread. Yes, she said. He leaned back slightly, his gaze steady, his amusement unmistakable. Shall we begin, he said. The universe, Stella Collins thought, as she turned and walked to that chair with every ounce of dignity she had left, which amounted to perhaps a tablespoon, had an absolutely unhinged sense of humor. She Saturday. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and comment. Stella Collins got the job, which was both a victory and a deeply suspicious life choice, because the universe had never given her anything without attaching a dramatic consequence and a slightly unhinged man in a tailored suit. She stood in her kitchen in her cereal-stained t-shirt and her mismatched socks, and she stared at the wall for a long moment, and then she said, to no one, to the universe, to whatever cosmic department handled irony, "You have got to be kidding me." Nobody could adequately explain how it had happened. The interview itself had lasted 37 minutes, which Stella knew because she had been watching the clock on the wall behind Sung Minut's head with the desperate focus of a woman measuring the distance between herself and freedom, and in those 37 minutes they had discussed her qualifications, her previous experience, her projected contributions to the firm's client communications department, and had also, at no point, directly acknowledged the lipstick on his sleeve or the grocery receipt in his pocket, or the fact that they had already met on a pavement that morning in circumstances that would be very difficult to include in either of their LinkedIn profiles. He had asked his questions in that same smooth, unhurried voice, pen moving across his notepad, dark eyes giving away precisely nothing, and Stella had answered with the clean, composed professionalism of a woman who had absolutely not committed a minor act of vehicular vandalism 4 hours prior. At the end, he had thanked her for her time, shaken her hand with the brief, efficient grip of a man who had already moved on to the next item on his agenda, and Stella had walked out of the boardroom with her spine straight and her hand steady and had immediately leaned against the wall outside the elevator and mouthed a very long, very sincere, entirely silent word at the ceiling. When HR called 2 days later, she had consulted 3 people, 2 search engines, and a strongly worded entry in her journal before deciding that the job was excellent, the firm was prestigious, the salary was the kind of number that made her student loan feel briefly manageable, and that she was an adult professional who was absolutely capable of working in the same building as a man who had told her she would dry while wearing her coffee. She accepted the position. She told herself it was practical. She told herself this convincingly, twice, while packing her work bag on her first Monday, and she was still telling herself this on the elevator up to the 14th floor, and she had almost fully believed it by the time she walked through the glass doors of Choi & Associates and found Sung Minute standing at the front desk, suit immaculate, expression professionally neutral, holding a coffee cup in one hand and looking at her with the quiet, controlled satisfaction of a chess player watching an opponent take a seat at the board. "Miss Collins," he said, pleasantly, "welcome." "Mr. Choi," she said, equally pleasantly, "lovely to be here." "Congratulations," Sung Minute said, his tone smooth, polite, and completely devoid of joy, as though he were announcing a tax increase instead of employment. Stella smiled brightly, the kind of smile that suggested she had already forgiven him for nothing and would absolutely do it again. "Thank you," she replied sweetly. "I look forward to working under you." His gaze flickered, just slightly. "Let's hope you can keep up," he said. "Oh, I always keep up," she returned, her voice light, her eyes sharp. "Sometimes I even overtake." They smiled at each other with the warm, glittering cordiality of 2 people who had absolutely not spent the weekend separately wondering what on earth they had gotten themselves into, and Stella's new desk, she discovered 17 seconds later, was positioned directly outside his office, close enough that he could see her whenever he looked up from his monitor, which she was certain was a coincidence in the same way that a thunderstorm on a picnic is a coincidence. That was how the war officially began. He stopped at her desk at 9:03, on her first day, with the quiet authority of a man who had never once had to raise his voice to get a room's full attention. "I take my coffee black," he said. "No sugar, no milk, medium roast, not dark, from the cafe on the ground floor, not the machine in the break room, because the machine produces something that is technically a liquid and otherwise unrelated to coffee, and I take it at 9:15, 12:30, 3 o'clock, and at 5 if I'm working late, which I generally am, so plan for 5. Stella looked up at him from her desk with the expression of a woman receiving information she was storing very carefully. 4 coffees a day, she said. "At minimum," he said. "Right," she said. "And Miss Collins," he said, and at the corner of his mouth was that fractional, devastating flicker. "I have an excellent palate, so please do try your best." He went into his office and closed the door, and Stella sat at her desk for exactly 4 seconds before she reached into her drawer, produced a small notepad, and wrote at the top of the first page, in her neatest handwriting, "Things I am going to do to this man's coffee," and underlined it twice. By 9:15 a.m., Stella had been sent for coffee twice. By 10 a.m., it was 4 times. By 11:30 a.m., she was beginning to suspect she had not been hired as an assistant, but as a highly specialized beverage delivery system with emotional endurance. "Too bitter," Sung Minute said, setting the cup down after one sip, his expression critical in a way that would make professional judges nervous. "You asked for black coffee," Stella replied, folding her arms, her tone dangerously calm. "I asked for good coffee," he corrected. She stared at him for a long, silent moment, the kind that carried entire speeches behind it. "Of course," she said finally, smiling. "My mistake, I forgot to consult the coffee's personality before purchasing it." He did not react, which was irritating, because she had worked hard on that line. "Again," he said, sliding the cup aside like a rejected audition. Stella took the cup, turned, and walked out with grace, dignity, and several thoughts that would not pass a background check. The next cup arrived 10 minutes later. Sung Minute took a sip, paused, then slowly lowered the cup. "What is this?" he asked. Coffee, Stella said, her voice innocent, her expression angelic. This tastes like dessert, he said, his tone flat. She tilted her head. Oh, she said softly, I thought you needed something sweet in your life. There was a pause. A very dangerous pause. His eyes lifted to meet hers, cool and steady, and for a brief second, something almost amused flickered beneath the surface. Careful, he said quietly. You are testing limits you do not understand. And you are drinking coffee you do not deserve, she shot back immediately. He took another sip. Slowly. Deliberately. Then set it down. Again, he said. Stella smiled. This time, it looked like a promise. By lunchtime, the office had unofficially chosen sides, though no one said it out loud, because survival instincts were still active. Stella, however, was thriving. By the end of her first week, the officers of Choi and Associates had collectively decided that Stella Collins was the best thing to happen to the 14th floor since they replaced the break room's fluorescent tube lighting with something that did not make everyone look like they were being processed for a police record. She had remembered everyone's name by Tuesday, everyone's coffee order by Wednesday. Stella laughed a lot, because she was a person who laughed a lot, warm and sudden and completely unrestrained, and she laughed with Jaiwon about Brutus and with Marcus about his half-marathon aspirations and with Hyun-ji about everything, and the 14th floor became, incrementally, a slightly more human place. Sung-minute noticed. She knew he noticed because she had excellent peripheral vision, which she had developed over years of navigating public transport and difficult family dinners, and in her peripheral vision she could see, from her desk, the precise angle of his jaw when he looked up from his monitor and registered the sound of her laughing at something Marcus had said, and it was not the jaw of a man who was indifferent. 3 minutes after the second notable laugh of her Thursday, she and Hyun-ji had been discussing a truly spectacular filing error that had sent an important client document to someone named Jeffrey Barnes instead of the intended Jeffrey Barnes, and the consequences had been both administrative and theatrical. Sung-minut's door opened. Miss Collins, he said, I need the Meridian client files pulled and reindexed. Stella looked up, she looked at Hyun-ji, she looked back at Sung-minut, and she picked up her notepad and stood with the smooth compliance of a woman who had not noticed anything, who was simply an excellent assistant responding promptly to a reasonable professional request. Of course, she said. She went to pull the Meridian files, which took 45 minutes, because there were a great many of them, and they needed to be reindexed in a specific order, and when she was done she returned to her desk and found that Marcus had gone to a meeting, and Hyun-ji was on a call, and the 14th floor was quieter, and Sung-minut's door was closed again, and Stella sat at her desk and looked at the door for a moment with an expression that she immediately rearranged into something neutral. It was fine. It was a work task. She pulled up her emails. For minutes later, his door opened again. Miss Collins, the Beaumont correspondence needs filing. On it, she said. The Beaumont correspondence took 30 minutes, and when she came back, the lunch crowd had dispersed. The following Tuesday, it happened again. She was in the break room with Jaiwon, both of them leaning against the counter with their mugs, deep in an extremely important conversation about whether Brutus the cat's personality constituted what legal scholars would call premeditated menace, and Stella laughed so hard at Jaiwon's description of Brutus knocking a full glass of water off the counter and then watching it fall with calm, scientific interest, that she had to put her mug down so she didn't spill it, and she was still laughing when she registered, in her excellent peripheral vision, the break room door. Sung-minut stood in it. He looked at her, she looked at him, and she watched him make, in real time, the decision to produce a reason for being there. Miss Collins, he said, my 3 o'clock coffee. It's 2:47, she said. I'll need it early, he said, with total composure. She brought him his coffee at 2:48, no sugar, genuinely black, because she was keeping him on his toes, and she set it on his desk and turned to leave, and behind her she heard him say, very quietly, as though it was leaving his mouth without his full permission, the Beaumont filing was done correctly. Stella paused at his door. High praise, she said, without turning around. It was a statement of fact, he said, not praise. Right, she said, and went back to her desk, and sat very still for a moment, and then wrote in her notepad. He checked the Beaumont filing, and stared at it for a beat longer than she intended before turning to her screen. The break room had a security camera, because of course it did, and Stella had noticed the little red recording light on her third day. By lunchtime, the office had unofficially chosen sides, though no one said it out loud, because survival instincts were still active. Stella, however, was thriving. In the break room, she danced. Not subtly. Not accidentally. Fully. Arms in the air, hips moving, energy unapologetic, as though the room existed solely for her personal entertainment. She spotted the security camera, the tiny red light blinking, and without missing a beat, she blew a dramatic kiss straight into the lens. "Miss Stella," came his voice from the doorway, calm, controlled, and carrying just enough weight to make the room straighten up. She turned, mid-spin, completely unbothered. "Yes, boss," she said brightly. "My office," he said. "Of course," she replied, grabbing a pastry on her way out like a woman who refused to be summoned on an empty stomach. Inside his office, the air felt different, quieter, sharper, like every word mattered more than it should. "You seem very comfortable," he said, leaning back in his chair, his gaze steady. "I believe in settling in quickly," she replied, taking a bite of her pastry with confidence. "This is a workplace," he said. "And I am working," she returned, swallowing neatly. "Multitasking, actually, morale boosting and snack appreciation." His jaw tightened, just slightly. "Less dancing," he said. "More coffee," she replied. "Exactly," he said. She smiled. He almost did not notice. Almost. The pattern continued, relentless, ridiculous, and strangely effective. Every time Stella laughed with someone else, loud and warm and completely unrestrained, Sung Minute found a reason to call her away. "Miss Stella, urgent file." "Miss Stella, immediate errand." "Miss Stella, my office, now." Always calm. Always reasonable. Never honest. Because honesty would sound like, "Why are you laughing with him like that?" And Sung Minute did not ask questions he could not justify. From across the office, Stella would catch it, the way his jaw tightened, the way his gaze lingered just a second too long before looking away. And she would laugh louder. On purpose. Petty, deliberate, and devastating. Yet beneath the chaos, something quieter slipped through the cracks. One afternoon, Stella shivered slightly at her desk, the air conditioning aggressive in a way that felt personal. She rubbed her arms once, dismissing it. 5 minutes later, the temperature adjusted. No announcement. No acknowledgement. Just warmth, subtle and precise. She glanced toward his office. He was working, focused, unreadable, as though he had not noticed anything at all. She murmured to herself, narrowing her eyes slightly. He also did not look up when, on Friday of the same week, he arrived at his desk at 8:45 to find a single-pane AU chocolate sitting on a paper napkin beside his keyboard, still warm, which meant someone had been in very recently, and there was no note, no name, nothing, just the pastry in the quiet morning office, and Sung Minute sat down and looked at it for a moment with an expression that had no professional category. He knew, without knowing precisely how, that it was hers. He ate it. He told no one. He told himself it meant nothing. On the last Friday of her first month, Stella stayed 20 minutes later than her official end time to finish a client summary she wanted off her desk before the weekend, and when she finally saved the document and reached for her bag, she looked up and found that the 14th floor was largely empty, and that Sung Minute's office light was still on. She could see him through the glass partition, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, working at his desk with the focused, self-contained concentration of a man who lived inside his work the way other people lived inside their homes, and Stella watched him for a moment, this man who was cold and smooth and occasionally sent her for non-existent paper clips, and she thought about the temperature on the thermostat and the Pain AU chocolate she'd left that he'd never mentioned, and she picked up her bag. She stopped at the break room. She was not going to do this. She looked at the last remaining pastry on the tray by the coffee machine, a small almond croissant that someone had brought in that morning and which had somehow survived the day, and she thought about the fact that it was Friday evening and he was still at his desk, and she was not going to do this, and she picked it up and put it on a napkin and walked to his office and knocked twice on the open door. He looked up. "Going home," she said, and set the napkin on the corner of his desk closest to the door, so that the delivery required no further entry, and turned to leave. "Miss Collins," he said. She paused. The pause lasted 3 seconds. "Have a good weekend," he said. She turned back just enough to catch his face, and there was nothing on it that she could read with certainty. "You too, Mr. Choi," and walked to the elevator and did not look back. Sung Minute sat alone in his office at 9:47 on a Friday evening, the city spread below his window in its full and indifferent glitter, the almond croissant half eaten on its napkin, and his phone face up on his desk. He was reviewing the Sato correspondence, or he was supposed to be reviewing the Sato correspondence, but the document had been open for 11 minutes and he had read the same paragraph 3 times and retained none of it. He picked up his phone. He went to his contacts, and he found the entry he had added on a Tuesday morning standing on a pavement outside Brew and Bliss Coffee, saved with the specificity of a man who had been very certain at the time that the label was funny and was less certain now that funny was the only thing it was. Lipstick Vandal. Number below, written in chilly red number 7 on a grocery receipt that he had, for reasons he was choosing not to examine, transferred to his contacts rather than thrown away as he had absolutely intended to. He looked at it. He was supposed to make her life difficult. That had been the plan. He thought about the Beaumont filing, done correctly. He thought about the meeting notes, organized chronologically, which was better. He thought about the sound of her laughing across the 14th floor, warm and sudden and completely without apology. He set his phone face down. He looked at the city. He was supposed to make her life difficult, and somewhere in the month of coffee wars and non-existent paperclips and 3 degrees on the thermostat he had, without planning it, without approving it, without anything that resembled a conscious decision, done something significantly more inconvenient than that. He picked up the Sardo correspondence. He read the same paragraph a 4th time. He set it down. He had no professional term for what was happening to him. He looked at his phone. He turned it face up. Lipstick Vandal. He looked at it for a long moment, in the quiet city-lit office, and then he put the phone in his jacket pocket, turned off his desk lamp, picked up his things, and walked to the elevator. He pressed the ground floor button. He stared at the closing doors. He was, he decided, going to need significantly more coffee tomorrow. Please subscribe, like and comment. The first thing Sung Minute noticed was the silence, not the absence of sound, but the absence of her, because Stella Collins did not enter rooms quietly. She arrived like a celebration, and suddenly, the celebration had paused. Miss Stella is late again, someone whispered, careful, like they were speaking about something fragile. Sung Minute did not look up immediately, because control had always been his first language, and reacting too quickly felt like losing a negotiation he did not understand. She will be here, he said calmly, his voice steady, his pen moving across paper that no longer held his attention. She was not. And when she did arrive, it was not the same. She smiled, yes, because Stella always smiled, but it was softer now, quieter at the edges, like a song playing from another room. You're late, he said, not looking at her at first. Traffic, she replied lightly. You live 10 minutes away, he said. And yet, she smiled, here we are. He looked at her then. Really looked. And something in his chest shifted, because Stella Collins, who used to argue like it was a sport, had started choosing silence like it was survival. The laughter slowed. The dancing stopped. The break room forgot what it felt like to be alive. And Sung Minute, who once called her back from everywhere, stopped calling her at all. Because now, when she laughed, he listened. Like it might be the last time. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday that looked exactly like every other Tuesday, because the world, it turned out, did not pause for devastating news, it simply continued like nothing had happened. Stella sat in the doctor's office, her hands steady in her lap, her chin lifted, her eyes clear, because she had always carried things well, even the ones that threatened to break her. Okay, she said softly, after the words had been explained, repeated, softened, and still felt impossibly sharp. Okay, she said again, like she was agreeing to something small. She told no one. Not at the office. Not him. Especially not him. Because Sung Minute fixed things. And this. This could not be fixed. So she carried it. With her chin up. With her hands steady. With her heart quietly breaking underneath. Sung Minute found out the way people always find out the things they were never meant to know. Too late. And all at once. A file. A name. A truth that did not ask permission before destroying him. No, he said quietly, because denial still belonged to him, no matter how controlled he was. He asked her. She told him. Sung Minute sat across his desk from Stella Collins and heard words that his brain received and his body refused, because there is a particular quality to certain kinds of news where the language arrives correctly but the meaning takes longer, where you hear and understand each individual word and cannot assemble them into something you're willing to accept as real, and he sat very still in his chair, the way he sat when he was doing the thing she had named, the quarterly report face, and he knew. He was doing it and he could not stop doing it because the alternative was something he had no container for. How long have you known, he said, and his voice was flat and even and gave away nothing, and he hated himself for it. 8 weeks, she said. 8 weeks, she had known for 8 weeks, and in those 8 weeks she had made his coffee and filed the Beaumont correspondence and eaten the pastries he left her and laughed with High and G and looked out the window on the quiet mornings when she thought no one was watching her, and she had carried it alone, in her way, with her chin up and her hands steady and her heart quietly doing whatever it had been doing underneath all of that composure. "Why didn't you?" he started. "Because," she said, and her voice was gentle, "I wanted to be Stella Collins who worked here, not Stella Collins who is sick, for a little longer, and I thought if I told people it would become the whole story, and I'm not ready for it to be the whole story." He looked at her across his desk, this woman who had dragged lipstick across his car window in broad daylight and argued installment payments on a pavement and blown kisses at security cameras and saved him pastries without signing her name, and he thought about 8 weeks, and the empty break room, and the laugh that had been getting quieter, and something shifted in him very slowly and very completely, the way a tectonic thing moves, quiet and enormous and permanent, and he said nothing for a long moment, and then he said, "Let's go to the hospital." Not "I'm sorry." Not "this is terrible." But "let's go to the hospital." The hospital did not feel real at first. It felt like a place pretending to help while quietly preparing people for goodbye. Stella was admitted on a rainy evening, the sky heavy, the air thick, the kind of day that already knew the ending. "I don't like this place," she muttered, glancing around. "You don't have to," Sung Minute replied softly, adjusting her blanket even though she had not asked. "You just have to stay." "Bossy," she said. "Efficient," he corrected. The care was relentless. Private room. Top specialists. Machines that never slept. Nurses who moved like time mattered. Everything that money, power, and desperation could buy sat beside her bed like offerings. And still, it was not enough. Sung Minute was there for everything. Every test. Every scan. Every moment she winced and tried to hide it. "Her response is not what we hoped," the doctor said carefully. "What do we do next?" Sung Minute asked immediately. "The cancer has spread," the doctor replied. Spread. Such a small word for something that takes everything. Sung Minute nodded once, like he understood, like he accepted, like he was not already planning 10 more ways to fight it. But Stella already knew. Because her body told her before anyone else did. She tired faster. Slept longer. Laughed less, not because she wanted to, but because it cost her now. One morning, she tried to sit up on her own and failed. She laughed. "Wow," she said breathlessly, "my body has officially resigned." Sung Minute was at her side instantly, helping her up, his hands careful, like she might disappear if he held too tightly. "You're not funny," he said quietly. "I'm hilarious," she corrected. But later, when she slept, he sat there watching her, because the woman who once danced in break rooms was now struggling to sit up in bed. And it was happening too fast. Far too fast. Days blurred. Each one taking something from her. Her strength. Her energy. Her light, slowly dimming in ways he could not stop. Her hair began to fall more quickly now, not in strands, but in handfuls that made even her pause. She stared at it once. Quiet. Then smiled. "Well," she said lightly, "less maintenance." Sung Minute turned away for a second, because if he did not, something inside him would break where she could see it. That night, he shaved his head. No speech. No explanation. Just a quiet decision. The next morning, he walked into her room like nothing had changed. She looked at him. Froze. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. "You really?" "It is practical," he said. "You're lying," she whispered. "Yes," he admitted softly. She laughed through tears, reaching for him. "You're unbelievable." "I am yours," he said. And that broke her. Because she knew. The care was perfect. The love was overwhelming. But the cancer was already ahead. Too far. Too fast. Too much. There were days she could not get out of bed. Days she spoke less. Days she simply held his hand and looked at him like she was memorizing him. "Stay," he would say quietly. "I'm here," she would whisper back. Even when she was not sure how long that would be true. And still, he tried. More doctors. More treatments. More hope forced into a space that no longer had room for it. Until finally, hope stopped pretending. "The receipt," he said. "From the first morning, your number on the back, I transferred it to my phone but I kept the paper. It's in my desk." She looked at him with an expression he was learning to read, the one that arrived just before the warm laugh, the one that meant he had done something she found both ridiculous and completely true, and she said, "Sung-Minute Choi, are you telling me you kept a grocery receipt for 4 months?" "I'm telling you I kept it," he said, and sat in the chair beside her bed, and looked at her levelly, because I did not want to let go of the only evidence that the morning had been real. Stella said nothing, and he said nothing, and the room was very quiet. "The heat," he said, after a moment. "I turned it up because you were cold and I noticed because I was watching, and I was watching because I couldn't stop, and I've known that for a long time and I did not do anything about it because I am, as you have correctly identified on multiple occasions, very difficult." "I said insufferable," she said, and her voice was not entirely steady. "Insufferable," he amended, "and you were right, and I save the last pastry for you every morning because you are the only person in that office who eats with any genuine pleasure. Everyone else eats at their desk like it's a transaction, and you eat like the thing in front of you deserves your attention, and I found that." He paused. "What?" she said, very quietly. "Extraordinary," he said. Stella Collins looked at him across the small room, and her chin was up, as it always was, and her hands were steady, as they always were, and her eyes were full in a way they were not always, and she said, "You called me back from the break room 74 times. "I counted 69, he said. "I counted 74, she said. "I kept a list." Something moved across his face that was not the quarterly report expression, something open and unguarded and slightly helpless, and he said, "I called you back because the sound of you laughing with people who don't know you the way I know you produced a feeling in my chest that I had absolutely no professional term for, and I handled it very badly. You sent me for a stapler that didn't exist," she said. "I did," he said. 3 times, she said. "I'm aware," he said. "Sung-Minute," she said. "I know," he said. "You are the most ridiculous man I have ever met," she said, and her voice broke, very slightly, on the last word, and he moved from a chair to beside her without making a decision about it, and he took her hand, and he said, against every instinct he'd been raised on, "Marry me." Stella Collins laughed. It was the real one, the loud, warm one. "You're doing this now," she said, "in a hospital room, while I'm wearing a cardigan with a vitamin C stain on the sleeve. You are doing this right now." "I'm doing this now," he said, and he was not smiling, exactly, but his face was doing something that was better than a smile, "because I have wasted a significant amount of time being impressive at you instead of honest with you, and I would like to stop wasting time." She looked at him, her eyes were very bright, and her chin was very up, and she said, "Your proposal is terrible." Stella looked at him for a long moment, and the laugh settled, and what remained underneath it was something quieter and truer and very, very steady, and she said, "Yes, Sung-Minute Choi, I am going to marry you, and I want you to know that this is the best and most objectively terrible proposal in documented human history." "I'll note that," he said. "You do that," she said. He brought her flowers the next morning, a truly unreasonable quantity of them. Their ordinary was extraordinary, the way all truly loved things are ordinary in the best possible sense, which is that they are real and daily and ask nothing of you except to be present for them. She went on a Thursday, which felt wrong to both of them in the specific way that practical details always feel wrong when they are the ones that remain, the date and the day and the time, all of it ordinary and therefore impossible, and she went knowing, which she had told him she wanted, which he had made sure of, which had cost him something enormous to help arrange because it required him to stand very close to a thing he could not fix and simply be present for it, which was the hardest thing Sung-Minute Choi had ever done and the most important. She held his hand, because he was there, because he had been there, because he had not left, not for a night, not for a board meeting, not for anything in the world that he had once thought mattered more than this room and this woman and this hand, and at the end she was still herself, still the woman with the chin up and the steady hands and the laugh that owned rooms, and she looked at him, and he looked back at her, and she said, in the voice that was very quiet now but still entirely hers, "You owe me a car window." He laughed, and it broke in the middle, and he didn't try to stop it, because there was no one here to be impressive for, there was only her, and for her he had learned how to let things be real. "I'll get you a better one," he said. "Gold trim," she said. "Whatever you want," he said. "Sung-Minute," she said. "I'm here," he said. "I know," she said, and closed her eyes, and she was smiling, and the room was quiet, and the city outside kept going. He did not go back to the office for 3 months, and when he did, the 14th floor was the same and completely different in the way that places are when the person who gave them their particular feeling is gone, and he walked past her desk, which was empty now and neatly cleared, and he did not stop, and he went into his office, and he sat down, and he opened his laptop, and he looked at the city through his window for a long time. Hyun-ji brought him a coffee at 9:15. Black, no sugar, medium roast, from the ground floor cafe. She set it on his desk without a word, and went back to her desk, and Sung-minute looked at the cup for a long time, and then he picked it up, and it was perfect, and that was worse than if it hadn't been, and he drank it anyway, because she would have wanted him to drink it. He ate the last pastry in the break room that afternoon, and there was no one to save it for, and he ate it standing at the counter like everyone else, like a transaction, and then he went back to his desk and sat very still for a moment. He pulled out his phone. He went to his contacts. Lipstick Vandal. He sat with his thumb against the screen for a long time, in the quiet of the late afternoon, the city beginning its early dusk outside the windows, and then he did not delete it, and he was not going to delete it, and he put the phone back in his pocket and got to work. The Stella Foundation opened on a Tuesday, which felt right, because it had been a Tuesday, because everything had started on a Tuesday, because a woman had uncapped a lipstick on a Tuesday morning outside a coffee shop and changed the entire trajectory of a life that had not known it needed changing. The Foundation's work was early detection, research funding, and support for patients who needed the kind of help that arrived before the crisis instead of after, because Stella Collins had carried an 8-week silence that might, in another world, have been shorter, and he was going to build the world where it was shorter, brick by brick and dollar by dollar and favor by favor, for as long as he was alive to do it. At the entrance of the Foundation's building, mounted in a simple frame of clean wood, hung a car window. On it, in the precise and deliberate arc of a woman who had done the thing properly, with a small flourish because she believed in details, was a kiss. Chili red number 7, bold and long-lasting and transfer-resistant, appropriate for all occasions. Beside it, on a small brass plate, 3 words. She left her mark. Sung-minute stood in front of it on the morning of the opening, in a charcoal suit, with an expensive watch, and a head he had kept shaved because he had made a decision in a bathroom on a Sunday and saw no reason to unmake it, and he looked at the lipstick kiss on the glass for a long time. He placed his hand flat against the glass, beside the kiss, just for a moment. Then he straightened his cuffs, and turned to face the room full of people who were waiting, and he walked forward, because she would have wanted him to walk forward, and because there was work to do, and because Sung-minute Choi was a man who, once, a long time ago on a Tuesday morning in a coffee shop, had rolled down a tinted window and, without knowing it, without planning it, without anything resembling a prepared agenda, had changed his entire life. He was going to make sure it mattered. He already had. Some people warn you before they change you. Stella Collins never did anything with a warning. She just walked in, uncapped her lipstick, and made her mark. And the man who once told her she would dry, made sure the world would never forget her name. The end. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, like and comment. I love you so much.